Welcome to the Green Building Show, where we investigate green design and building trends throughout Australia.
It's the bane of many inner city homeowners. A shortage of space which restricts not only the feel, but the functionality of a home. This week, we continue our series on big ideas for small spaces. I'll be sitting down with interior design and furniture specialist Wende Reid, who's going to explain some creative ways to get the most out of your small living spaces.
I'm here today with Wende Reid. She's a project and furniture designer and also the principal of Form and Colour design firm based in Paddington in Sydney. Thanks for being with us, Wende.
My pleasure.
Great, so we're talking today about doing big things with small spaces. So I guess what is your opinion is the first point of call for designing for a small space?
The first thing you need to do is to think about the function that you require in that space. You need to evaluate all of your needs, whether they're active needs, whether it's passive, if it's combined cooking and entertaining, if you're going to also, just everything you need to do, and then there will be a way to accommodate it. But if you don't take it into account, you'll be surprised later.
Okay, and great. And what are the main challenges? I know that sounds like a silly question. Obviously, you're going to have less space, but what are some of the restrictions that are going to materialise first?
The main challenge, of course, is making sure that the ergonomics are right, not only for storage, but when you're functioning, for everything to go smoothly so that you don't feel physically constrained. And that's possible as long as you plan it.
All right, fantastic. And is it all challenge, or does a small space represent some opportunity that perhaps a larger space doesn't have?
Definitely, a small space represents opportunity. In fact, on your website, there's an image of an enormous space by Ricardo Bofill, and it's much more challenging to design an enormous space and make sure it's not boring than to design a really cohesive, smaller space, as long as you use all the elements available to you.
And what about structural renovations, Wende? I guess what are some of the key elements to making those structural changes to make the most out of a small space?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is storage. And the storage has to be well organized on the inside. It also has to be as neutral as possible on the outside. One of the things that's counterintuitive about a small space, everybody thinks that if they make everything white, it'll look bigger, but actually white is the brightest color and it comes towards you. So the idea is definitely to use monochromatics to build a broad and not deeper than necessary wall of storage at the very least that disappears. But very often if you paint the walls a medium value color or just a few steps deeper than white, it will recede. And that's really good, to get the walls to step back, but to work for you, because behind them is all the things that you need. Okay,
I find that interesting. I was actually leading into a colour question. I guess what impact can the colour have to really influence the perception of a small space?
Again, it's important to, and this is true in all size spaces, but really critical in a small space, it's important to understand what colour does, that it has creates different illusions. So if you use a color that's not bright, but that is not white, so that it sits down a bit, it will step back. And if you use that consistently in the space, decide on something, it can be a soft gray, it can be a soft green, it can be a soft blue, red or yellow come forward, so that wouldn't be a good idea. So you can step the walls back and you can unite them, and then you can bring other things towards you and create focal points. Maybe a beautiful mirror and vase on the wall, something like that, can be white and come forward, but you've controlled it so that the rest of the space is stepping back.
Cool, all right, great. And just back to structural renovations for a moment, Wende, I guess what are some key things or some key rules that people should really follow? Is it, if you see an interior wall and it doesn't have a big supporting beam, then knock it down?
Open up the space as much as possible. Even if you can, open up the ceiling. The visual illusion of space is almost as good as real space. So open it up as much as you can and make sure that the sight lines are unobstructed. So if you do have barriers like kitchen benches, or you want to section certain areas off slightly, make sure that you can see over them, and then you've created a sense of multiple use without breaking it up.
Cool, all right, great. And what in your opinion is the most underutilized space in any interior space?
There's a couple of different options. Under stairs is a really good place to put desks or additional storage. Also above the eye line is a great place to store things. Again, if you can open up the roof, then you've got the idea of a raked ceiling and you can kind of stick things on the side that nobody even notices. In a case like that where you wouldn't be up there, you can even face those things with reflective surfaces and they would literally vanish. Be very careful of reflective surfaces at your eye line. You really don't want to spend your life watching yourself. It's like having two of you in the room at all times. So make sure that if you are going to use the trick of reflective surfaces, that they're above your eye line, or at least above your eye line when you're sitting down. Or it could be on horizontal surfaces like a coffee table that could have a mirror top and just visually disappear.
Right, okay. Okay, great. And on that coffee table, when we're talking about what you use to fill the space, the furniture and the pieces within the space, I guess what are some tricks that you adhere to make the most out of it? Is it having less is more or more?
Yes, less is more. Not more little pieces. In fact, that's kind of, people think that they have to have little weeny pieces in a small space, but actually it's counterintuitive. You're better off having broad, unbroken lines, but that are shallow.
Right.
So obviously you need comfort in a sofa, so you can't really have it shallow. You want to be able to sit down. But for cupboards, you just need one broad, unbroken line. Keep it as narrow as possible. Luckily, of course, technology has gotten small, so we don't really need big cupboards anymore to hold things like that. Again, you can have a multiple use divider. You could have a kitchen workbench that is work on one side, dining on the other, and then on the end of it, the end cap can be a bookcase that faces the living area, or it can be where you mount your TV. So you get the sense of an unbroken room, but really you've got 2 different or 3 different designated areas.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I guess what would your ideal, if we're talking living space, what would your ideal small space look like?
Oh, okay, well I guess I just described my ideal space. It would have a raked ceiling and it would have a lot of light, tall windows, things like that, obviously open something up. If you don't have a lot of light, you can still create the illusion of it by, if, for example, you're in a basement and you've got high windows, you can multiply the amount of light by facing the inside of them with a reflective surface. But the ideal space would have skylights, it would have high, tall windows, it would have an open floor plan, it would have low built-in, very comfortable seating, maybe an L-shaped sofa area. It would have a galley kitchen with a bench in front of it and seating on one side, work on the other, and big wide cap at the end with bookcases facing the living room.
Cool, all right, great. So for people watching this interview, they've just heard some fantastic tips from you, but they're not sure what's the most important, or what was the most important message or takeaway. So if there was one key piece of advice people could walk away from this interview really nailed down inside their heads, what would that one piece of advice be?
Planning. You have to know what you want to do in that space. You have to know what you have to work with to begin with. You have to always have, if you're going to be renovating, if you're doing structural renovations, number one, you need great documentation. Just filing, if you need to file for a DA to do your work, just the DA drawings are not enough. You need a whole packet of elevations as well as a plan. And if you don't feel confident about what you're doing, get professional advice, but make sure that the advice you're getting is thorough. It's a big investment, you've got to live with it in a small space, make sure it works for you, and so that you get a smooth, comfortable environment to live in.
Perfect. Wende Reid, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.